Welcome to another episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's official podcast.
I'm delighted to be here today discussing youth issues in the Commonwealth. I'm Marshall Tisdale, the Programmes Officer at the CPA, and I'm delighted to be joined by Honourable Borg Bonello, Member of Parliament from Malta, Zaria Ingham from the Turks and Caicos Islands, and Kemuel, Pascall from Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you all.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
My pleasure. We're recording this podcast for International Youth Day, and we wanted to have conversations with young people across the Commonwealth, and we thought who better to approach than the youngest Member of Parliament elected in the Commonwealth. Eve, you were elected back in 2022, was it?
Yes.
Yes, you were. And you were. How old were you when you were elected?
I was 18 when I contested and was elected to Maltese Parliament. A bit insane, but I wouldn't change it for anything in the world.
Yeah, and you're studying whilst also being a Member of Parliament.
Yes.
That must be a challenge, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. And then Zaria and Kemuel, you were participants at our Commonwealth Youth Parliament in Wellington last year. Do you guys want to share your thoughts on how you found that experience? Zaria, if you want to go first.
Absolutely. The experience for me being in Wellington, New Zealand, being exposed to the parliamentary procedures from experts, having the opportunity to interact with so many vibrant, dynamic young people from across the Commonwealth, and being so immersed within parliamentary process from the introduction of the bill all the way to the passing um, of the bill. It was such an amazing life-changing experience because not a lot of times you see young people have that opportunity to get such hands-on detailed experience, especially when it comes to legislation or policy making, policy drafting. And so to be one of those individuals in these rooms, having these dynamic discussions with experts as well as with these talented and brilliant young people, it was an experience unlike any other that I'm so excited that I was privileged to be able to experience.
Yes, like Zara, I too share her sentiment in terms of the overall experience. I remain very, very grateful to not just my parliament here in Trinidad, but the CPA for hosting the 12th Commonwealth Youth Parliament over in New Zealand. It was an amazing opportunity, one, to immerse ourselves in the whole aspect of parliamentary practice and procedure from the introduction of the bill all the way to the committee stage, having the ability to speak to subject matter experts and get an idea, having the ability to draft amendments for the legislation. Um, it was just an overall great experience. I think the most memorable part of it was the ability to have met so many young persons from across the Commonwealth. Something that I am extremely grateful for. I think just building those friendships and those what I see as lifelong bonds, um, like topped off the experience for me.
I'm glad you both enjoyed it, and you were both excellent there. It was a pleasure meeting both of you and everyone else who took part. And we're looking forward to hosting our next youth parliament, I believe next year. And so, anyone listening, if you want to get involved under the age of 29, sign up, reach out to your parliaments. Now, I wanted to get an idea from each of you. What's got you involved in politics? What's motivated you to want to, one, in Eve's case, get elected to Parliament, but in all of your cases, what was that first moment of like, no, I'm interested in politics and I want to go into sort of public service?
Definitely. I was always someone who was immensely interested in politics, even before I realized that myself. At a young age, I'd always be following the news, reading the papers, wanting to know what was going on. I remember when I was super young, when I was a child, and everyone would be talking about politics and current affairs around the dinner table. I'd always want to be well read enough to have an opinion to present at the table. And my adolescence coincided with a very particular time for Malta when there were a lot of scandals going on, and predominantly what really made me want to get involved and make a difference was the assassination of investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. I remember I was around 14 years old when that happened, and I didn't want to accept that in a modern European country a journalist could get assassinated, especially one that exposed high level corruption. And for that reason, I started getting more involved as well in terms of environmental issues. I was always very interested. I remember going and attending my first protest on an environmental issue when I was 12 years old. And from all these activism circles, I understood that every campaign that passed, every protest that passed, every attempt to make change that passed always depended then on the members of parliament actually taking aboard those ideas, heeding the call of civil society activists, common citizens to make that change. So I started asking whether it might make more sense to get involved more directly. So at that point, I started writing in the papers. I got involved in the youth wing of the party, which I formed part of. And then 2022 rolled around and the general election was approaching. And I thought it would be a good idea to contribute. At first, I was very scared. I had a lot of reservations. As we said before, I was 18 years old, still a student. But when there's a will, there's a way, and I was very lucky to end up getting elected, despite having a very short campaign that was 3 weeks long, spending the least in the election. My campaign costed me €500, which I saved up from my student stipend, and it ended up working out. And I am immensely grateful to form part of my country's highest institution and to have a direct say, not only on my behalf, but on behalf of all who I represent.
Thank you. Kemuel, how about you? What made you get into politics?
Sure. So at the age of, I really remember, well, one, I've always been interested in like news, and obviously in the news you see stuff about politics. And if you know how Trinidad and Tobago society is made up, most of our news is centered around politics. Every issue comes back to politics. And so I think at the age of 15, I kind of just had this I don't want to call it a strange interest, but I had this very deep interest in politics, and I started following politics on a whole new level. And so that has just remained with me from age 15 up until now. So now, 10 years later, I am here, very much involved in politics. I've had the opportunity, as you would have known, to be a national youth parliamentarian on 2 occasions, and also have participated in our regional youth parliament, and most recently last year the Commonwealth Youth Parliament. So my interest in politics started from the age of 15, where I just wanted to understand like why things are the way that they are, um, why politics, and I think that's where it all started for me.
Yeah, I think asking why is what gets us gets a lot of people into it. It's like why is this the way it is? Who's decided this, and what can I do
Yes.
about it? What about you, Zaria?
Honestly, I think we're all cut from the same cloth. First of all, why is my favorite question in the whole wide world? But also in growing up, I believe that I was able to see things within society that not a lot of persons around my age would have taken notice of. And I wanted to understand, well, why is that? Why is it that, the policies are drafted in the way that they are? Why is it that the culture that we've been able to cultivate at this point in time is the way it is? How are my people being influenced? Or how are the policies and the procedures that are being shaped affecting not only my people as a whole, but young people? And so for me, it wasn't even necessarily about getting into politics per se. I mean, yes, I had a fascination for the news. I remember as a young girl begging my parents every week to buy me the newspaper so I can always stay up to date. Being at an internship at 13 years old, having great debates with persons like 40 plus about current affairs. Like even though those memories, I guess, hinted at me being very curious about, the political or current affairs in my country. At the same time, it wasn't really never about getting into politics per se, but it was honestly about stepping into purpose and just being drawn to people. I've always believed that to be young is not to be waiting for the future, but it's to be actively shaping it. And growing up in the Caribbean, you come to understand very early that the choices that are made within parliaments and boardrooms, they eventually find their way into your classroom, into your neighborhood, into your home. And so I leaned in not necessarily to chase power because with chasing power you miss the fundamental component, which is the people that you impact. But instead, I leaned in to help carry that responsibility. I really wanted to just use my voice to share young people's stories, to share their perspectives, and to really just help to bridge the gap between policy, culture, and young people.
That's brilliant. Honestly, if I could jump in there, you really, really summed it up perfectly and so eloquently.
Thank you.
Often we forget that politics is a means to an end and not an end in itself. And that we are at the end of the day not here on behalf of ourselves, but to represent others and to make change. And I really, really feel like you summed that up really, really, really well. I'm jealous of your eloquence.
Your story was amazing. Like I was just sitting here like, wow, like she is really doing the thing. You love it. You love it.
Exactly. At age 18 is just like mind blowing. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a bit more, Eve, about being elected so young, and how you feel your age has either helped or hindered you in political spaces, and then also balancing, life outside of Parliament, being a young person, because like we all have, I like to feel, I mean, I can't speak for you guys, but having active social lives, university work, starting careers. Um, it's hard to balance at the best of times, let alone when you're an elected representative. So tell us, how do you manage? We need to, because we want to make notes.
Honestly, I think the honest answer is that I don't. I don't always manage. I'd be lying if I said I did. With regards to your first question about how being a young person either helped or hindered me in political spaces, I would say that it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both because being so young helps me relate to younger people without forcing it, because I am going through the exact same things. I face the same struggles, and I also benefit from the same opportunities. So it's much easier for me to communicate with people my age. And not only that, being younger, we're born into the world of technology and social media that was more foreign to those who came before us, and maybe it took them time to adapt. And so it's easier to get the message out on social media. It's easier to understand what a TikTok trend is and how to communicate that effectively. So I'd say yes, the main thing that helps is the perspective and the communication. And obviously, there are the issues that come with it as well. I feel that sometimes you'd have those elements which are few and far between, to be honest, but those times when you'd feel either a bit patronized or you would feel like your opinion won't hold as much weight in a room with people with much more expertise. But I like to flip that on its head and see the positive out of it, because I'm very lucky to have the colleagues that I do. I have some colleagues in Parliament that have been members of Parliament longer than I've been alive. And I am really, really grateful to them because I never felt put down or patronized for that. In fact, they're always the first to approach you and be like, listen, if you need any help, I've been doing this for ages. please feel free that you could reach out and ask for help. And in turn, I always do find them of great support and great help, which is a massive bonus to me. So it's always about looking at the positive side. In terms of work-life balance, well, I don't think that really exists anymore. I try to keep a balance, but sometimes it does get tough because, especially in Malta being such a small country, you're expected to be much more present, in the sense that maybe in bigger jurisdictions, the politician is someone far away that you just really see on the news and evaluate from afar. The politician in Malta is your neighbor, your relative, your colleague. An interesting part of this is the fact that Parliament is part time. So, unless you're a minister, if you're a backbencher or a member of the opposition, you still work normally, and Parliament's just something that happens in the afternoon. So the positive end of that is that you remain integrated with society and don't end up in a secluded bubble. The negative is that time, well, there's 24 hours in a day and it's very hard to cope. Same thing with resources. MPs in Malta have a massive lack of resources, especially opposition MPs, in comparison to the government ministers we have to hold to account. So that's an added layer of difficulty. As a teenager now in my 20s, yes, sometimes it's a bit tricky to navigate having a social life, and staying true to yourself and enjoying life, but also remembering that you have to maintain the honor of your office, the seriousness, the real responsibility and weight of responsibility of your office. So yes, especially towards the beginning of the legislature, I found myself being very anxious, even having a drink with my friends. Is this proper? Is this right? Could this be seen in the wrong way? But a long time, with the maturity and confidence that's slowly growing, and I'm saying growing and not grown because it's, I feel, a lifelong process. You tend to find your bearings a bit more. With studies, it's always a hassle. I mean, I feel that I'm cursed, that every time I have a really important set of exams to sit for, there's always a massive controversy or election or campaign in the country. It's like they're planned around my exams.
Yeah, they're out to get you. It's
Yeah,
like, how can we
I'm
best
starting to
protect
think
you?
that. I'm starting to think that, honestly. I'm a law student and it's a 4-year course. And when I was in the first year of the course, I contested the election. That one's on me. When I was in second year, there was a particular controversy, and I was very involved with a campaign around justice for a young construction worker that had died on the job. Jumbo Sofia, which it culminated in actually us managing to get a public inquiry to expose what went wrong and what could have been prevented institutionally to make sure that these things don't happen again. When I was in third year, there were the MEP and local council elections, which I didn't contest myself, but we were very, very involved in the campaign. And I remember particularly a bit after the results had came out from the election, my party held a rally, and I didn't want to miss it for anything in the world. And so this rally took place outside the party headquarters. So what did I do? On a Sunday morning, I found an empty office in the party HQ, left my low notes there, went down for the rally, yelled, screamed, and had fun with the supporters and my colleagues. And right after, I went up again, had a nap, studied till 1 a.m., and the next day I was up for the exam. So balance is what you make it, I guess. I feel like I'm still figuring that one out, but if there is a secret, well, it's loads of coffee.
You guys agree with that? Loads of coffee?
Oh, 1,000%.
Always.
If I may ask, right, do you believe that you won being elected at the age of 18, and two, being a woman, do you feel that you have gotten respect within the political space that would make you want to stay, or was it, do you feel like you had to like fight um to find your space in that particular area?
That's a really great question. Um, to be honest, I feel like you always have to fight for your space, especially within Malta's particular electoral system, as we don't operate on a first by the post system like the UK, but our system sees 13 districts, constituencies, and 5 MPs from each constituency. So your direct competitors, so to say, are candidates contesting your constituency, both from your party and from the or others, other parties. So there is that constant thing in which you have to fight for a space and make sure you're heard, especially that our parliament is one of the biggest per capita. So it's up to you, as in you're given the opportunity once you're elected, and then it's up to you what you make of it. You'd find MPs which are very good legislators that do an excellent job in Parliament and maybe not are as present within their constituency. You might find MPs which are the inverse, very present within their constituency, but maybe not so active on the legislative side of Parliament. And you find people that are really good at both. It depends. It really, really depends. I believe that when there isn't a seat for you at the table, it's on you to bring a folding chair. So it's really up to
That
you
was
to
good.
make the best of it. Thanks. I was really proud of that one. And it's really about making your own space, owning it, but also opening it up to others, because at the end of the day, even if you're the most eloquent and well-versed MPs, it's up to you to lobby for the things you want, and that comes from creating strong bonds, maintaining friendships, alliances. So I feel like it's always a struggle. It's what you make of it. In terms of being young and a woman, my particular experience is that I dealt with quite a lot of backlash, because Maltese politics is very divisive. Unfortunately, it's very tribal at times and partisan. So someone like me who would be very, very passionate might be taken the wrong way or receive equal or oppositely, even inversely, more passionate response. And what's important is to identify what is constructive criticism that's just presented passionately, that you might not agree with, to take what you can from it, learn what you can from it, and move on and grow. And to identify what's just purely hate. I mean, I dealt with a number of death threats in the past as well, and I even see that when it's the more intense criticism, yes, I feel like it may be related to gender and age. I mean, we see certain comments about female politicians in Malta that I don't feel you'd necessarily see about male politicians. I mean, I've received comments in the past about how women and women like me should be raped and beaten, which I do not think anyone would still say to a man. Inversely, when a man is very passionate, they're immediately seen as leadership material, whereas actually on this point I had an interesting conversation with an older female colleague, because we were talking about the very gendered criticism, and she had told me something that I'll never forget. She said, well, you don't really ever win, because if you're passionate as a younger woman, you're a true little girl, but then again, if you're passionate as an older woman, you're a nagging housewife. So there's always going to be something, and I don't say that to put off anyone from politics or to send a message of giving up, because there's always going to be this criticism. In fact, my message I wanted to be to recognize that there's always going to be struggles. It's up to us to rise above and raise everyone else with us.
That's great. I'm here taking my notes. Like, that was powerful.
Well, I will throw this question to Zaria and Kemuel. What do you guys believe is the most pressing issues facing young people in the Caribbean, but also around the Commonwealth, around the globe? I imagine there's probably a lot of similarities across countries. But yeah, what do you guys think is pressing for us young people?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for that question. In all honesty, it feels like the world today can be so heavy for young people. I mean, there's the weight of economic uncertainty, the ache of climate anxiety, the silent epidemic of mental health and well being. And perhaps most painfully, we're more connected than ever thanks to technology, but many of us feel alone in our struggle to be seen and adequately supported, especially when it comes to advocacy. Um, And the thing is, we're expected, or there's this expectation to be everything, to be resilient, employed, educated, informed, etc., without necessarily always having the right tools or, access to achieve these things. But even with that weight, I am so proud of us as a demographic, as a generation, in that we continue to show up. The most pressing issue, I believe, isn't necessarily just a policy gap, but it's a recognition gap. What young people are most asking for is partnership. We want to be included because, not because it's trendy, but because it's right. We're basically already leading, we're already doing the work. We just need spaces that see young people not as, I guess you could say, quote unquote, works in progress, but as people with wisdom, with ideas, and with actual valid lived experience that can transform communities right now. We need support systems that meet our real needs, things like safe environments, access to opportunity, and even meaningful belonging. Because the truth is, when it is that you have young people who feel seen and supported, they don't just survive, but they lead.
I definitely loved how she put it. We want partnership, because oftentimes I say youth in the Caribbean want to have a seat at the table, but I think today I received my answer um from you, Eve, in terms of if you don't have a seat at the table, then you need to bring your folding chair. And so, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but here in the Caribbean, the youth face a lot of issues, as Zaria spoke about, sorry, unemployment, and you're expected to have your things together, if I may put it like that. But I think more than that, the youth really do want a partnership, because we believe that um we have meaningful things that we can put forth, if I may put it like that. And sometimes we honestly do feel that we are heard, yes, but we are not listened to, in terms of like what we suggest. Those things are not actually like taken seriously. And I think that's one of the major issues, and one of the main reasons why youth are, getting very disinterested, or uninterested rather, sorry, in politics, because they feel as though we are not being heard, like we're just being used, but not necessarily being listened to get our plans actually carried out.
I guess my question is that is, what do you think we can do as young people, but also what can our governments do? What can the Commonwealth do to like better reflect the priorities of young people um, in legislating and representing us? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
I think Kemuel touched on a huge topic, in the sense that I think, especially because a lot of us have either entered or just finished our political season. One thing that I've seen, not even nationally, but regionally, internationally, is that there's been a sense of disillusionment that has plagued our generation, to the point where you can see that in voter turnout numbers, even in just everyday conversations that you would have with young people. And so, to even answer your question, I've had many opportunities to travel regionally and internationally, and to be in many spaces as the youngest person in the room. And I'll be honest, in the sense that a lot of what I'm hearing from each of us is that, there has been a sense of tokenism that has been involved, where it's like youth are being seen, maybe being heard, but not necessarily being listened to. And I'll be honest in that I've experienced that. And before I even had a name for it, it exists. Like, it's the reality. There are moments where you're invited to stand in the spotlight and, shake hands and smile for the camera, but then, where's the follow up? Where's the collaboration? Where's the change? Sometimes that term, tokenism, it can feel like a photo shoot, but true inclusion feels like a partnership. I've also been gracious I've also had the gracious opportunity to experience what co-creation actually looks like. So, for example, I was invited to sit at the same table with leaders from across the Caribbean, ministers of education, and I was able to present recommendations crafted by young people throughout the Caribbean region as relates to school safety. And right afterwards, I sat in committee meetings at the same table with them, where every single section of a document, making sure that they were carefully shaped by young voices. I was there and I physically signed the youth policy that came into activation in 2022. And it was amazing knowing that our contributions didn't just like sit on a shelf, but they became part of a national framework. And that's what transformation looks like. You know, it requires more than appearances. You know, it requires accountability, partnership, like Kemuel made mention of. And also, it takes organizations to understand um, and to have the courage to believe that young people are not threats to legacy, but we are, in fact, stewards of the future. You know, we're not trying to raise the wisdom that came before us, but actually, we're trying to build on it because we will one day inherit these systems. And again, it's only fair that we help to shape what we are being asked to carry.
Yeah, you really summed that up beautifully, especially your last line there saying that young people are not threats to legacy but stewards of the future. That's a really, really beautiful way of putting it. And something that I feel always comes up, I wanted to speak about this both at a local and international level. Um, Oftentimes, whenever there is a debate or policy discussion that has to do with youth, it is immediately thought of in the context of education, and sometimes is often limited to that in terms of even participation of young people. I always try to send a message that there's no such thing as necessarily a youth issue. I mean, there are those issues that impact young people the most, like first-time buyers in terms of housing. Education is a big one, obviously. But being that, and I'd like to tie it into what you said about us being stewards to the future and us actively being the future and not just waiting for it to pass us by, is that we're going to inherit this world, our country, our community. So it's up to us to make sure that it's not only livable, but to make it better and to always seek to improve it. And that's why I feel like when we talk about issues, youth issues, we need to burst that bubble. We need to think of it in a wider perspective, because to me, climate change is a youth issue, the environment is a youth issue, our development and planning policies are youth issues, just as much as education, employment, and everything else is health. I really see it as something that we need to look at with a bigger perspective. Same thing goes for women. A lot of the time, when I'm invited to panels and my female colleagues are invited to debates about women's issues, it's often reduced to the usual set of issues, where in reality, anything related to housing is a woman's issue just as much as employment and everything else. So I really like stepping back, because sometimes I feel like we give these labels out of goodwill, without realizing the inverse effect they may have. And that's why I think programs like you have taken part in terms of youth parliament, even back here in Malta we have our national youth parliament, are really interesting and really beneficial, because they don't only talk about the quote unquote youth issues, but that have a debate on artificial intelligence and automation, that have a debate on the workforce, that have a debate on education and everything under the sun, because these are all youth issues. In terms of the Commonwealth and other international organizations and transnational partnerships and such, I feel like the Commonwealth is uniquely positioned to really project itself as a voice for youth. Because if I were to compare to, for example, the European Union, which Malta forms part of, which has more of a aging population, the Commonwealth has many countries that have very young populations. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, about 60% of the Commonwealth is considered young people. So I feel like the best way forward is to continue to make these partnerships with several international organizations, and I feel the youth element would just be something natural. That would be the next step. The fact that we have these two great young people with us today on this podcast that were really, really eloquent and could put a lot of really experienced politicians to shame, I think is a win in itself and speaks really, really well to the future of our generation and that of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all that you've stated. I think for me, every time I'm asked a question like this or similar to this, um, I often try to not just place my issues on the front burner. I often try to, take into consideration the issues of fellow youth, because every person sees their issue or their challenge as unique and as important to them. And so, while I believe that the Commonwealth has done a lot, even the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, they have done a lot of work, not just with parliaments at a senior level, but also at a youth level. I do believe that there is a lot more that can be done from a Commonwealth perspective. I think, as Eve would have mentioned, tackling things like climate change from a youth perspective, because climate change doesn't just affect older persons; it affects us, the youth, the younger persons coming up. We have to now live in this world going forward, and I think that things that we could look at further is things like the promotion of gender equality and inclusion. I think that we could also try to like facilitate regional and global collaboration more. And I say that because whilst there are a lot of programs that are undertaken by Commonwealth organizations, a lot of times us in the Caribbean, we are kind of left out. And I'd like to say that in terms of like being able to actually attend those programs, a lot of times funding might be an issue, and so sometimes if you're not entirely left out, you're just not told because you're kind of not going to be able to attend. And the last thing I'd like to speak about is data and research. I think a lot of times we take for granted how much data and research factors in or should factor in into things that we do in for. Because I mean, we could be speaking about things here, but a lot of times we don't have the data to support what we are speaking about, so that therefore means that we can't actually build out programs which would actually suit the needs of particular populations. Because what may be needed in Malta uh, might not be needed here in Trinidad and Tobago. What's needed in Turks and Caicos probably isn't needed in India. So I think that's an important factor, and that's something that the Commonwealth should probably look at. I don't know how they could look at it in terms of partnering countries to improve their data and their research, and that's really it for me.
Thank you, all of you. I'm going to bring this to a close with one final question. Um, and we'll try and keep it short and snappy kind of thing. But I wanted to ask, um, generally for all three of you, what gives you all hope about the future of youth leadership, both in your own countries and internationally, and then for our CY peers, do you either of you have any intention of entering elected politics, like Eve at such a young age? But yes, so hopes about a future of leadership and future election member of parliaments amongst us. Um, Eve, what about you? How about your view for the future?
I feel like if more young people are anything like you guys, then the future is really bright. Every time I'd be invited to address or hold a workshop for young people before a youth parliament or any sort of thing like that, those are some of my favorite experiences because there's nothing I love more than seeing young people get involved and trying to help in any way I can. And I do feel like, yes, there is that element of apathy that we've spoken about today as well. But something I feel very strongly about is you cannot shame people out of apathy. You have to inspire them. And there's a lot of young people that, even those that are in the stereotypically politically engaged and involved in civil society, that do have these big ideas about what they want from their future, are concerned about the issues that are affecting them. What we need to do is give them a platform. And I feel once we implement more civic education in our schools, once we promote more of a civically involved culture, I feel that would happen naturally. But honestly, I feel the way to combat the disillusionment is like what Zaria was saying: promote partnership and not tokenism. Because the minute that participation becomes tokenism instead of a real effort to reach across and take on board those ideas, that's where young people would be put off. But honestly, the reason I do what I do is because I have hope, and because I really do hope my country, the world, can be better, and that young people are going to be at the forefront of that change. The minute I lose that hope is the minute I would no longer contest elections.
I think I'll go. I think you asked about hope, right? Like what gives me hope for the future, right? Um, well, it would be remiss of me if I don't recognize Eve. I think she has done great work, especially being elected at the age of 18. That in itself is phenomenal. It's amazing. It just speaks to what youth can do if given the opportunity to. I think what really gives me hope from a Trinidad and Tobago perspective and a Caribbean perspective is that I'm seeing that there is, though it's slow drive towards more young persons being elected to office, and not just elected to positions, but actually being appointed to certain positions of governance and of prominence. Even here in Trinidad and Tobago, um, I could think about the Prime Minister, well, the President, sorry, of Guyana. I could think about the Prime Minister of Jamaica. They are young. They are fairly young if you think about politics. So when I look at our region, I'm like, okay, things are slowly changing. In Dominica, you had a couple of years ago the youngest ever MP being elected. I can't remember how old she was, but she has in herself is very young. So we're moving towards it very slowly, and that gives me hope for the future of what's possible and what you can do.
And any plans to stand yourself in the future?
Yes, if given the opportunity, I probably will. As much as like you mentioned, Malta is very very divisive in terms of politics. So too is Trinidad and Tobago, and so I'm not particularly a fan of that. But I do believe that I have something to contribute, and because of the fact that I have something to contribute, I would, you know, I would do it.
Excellent. There we are. We'll mark that down as a win. Um, Zaria, how about you?
When it comes to anything where you have to make a decision, you're going to have polarizing sides. And so, even looking at the political landscape, I think now more than ever, politics can be so intimidating, But like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, politics at its core is about the people. It's not just about elections or who can have the fiery debates. It's about school funding, or maybe access to clean water, or your right to be heard and safe. And so for me, even if I don't run for office, young people, we can still shape systems regardless. Maybe I can be the one who helps others wield or influence that pen, that writes that petition, that asks the hard question, that starts the community program, builds the app, or tells the story. As young people, we don't necessarily have to fit a particular mold. We just have to be courageous enough to bring our truth. And as it relates to hope, I honestly believe that hope lives in the ordinary acts of courage from the young people that I see every day. You, Honorable Bonello, being one of them, from your amazing story. It's the youth advocate who's like sleeping. You're so welcome. It's the youth advocate who's like sleeping in a tent for a seat at the global summit, or it's the digital activist turning their voice into a campaign that could possibly change laws. You know, what gives me hope is that this generation, our generation, is not waiting for change, but we are the change. We're the ones who are choosing collaboration over competition, values over vanity, purpose over popularity sometimes. And we're not waiting to inherit leadership, but we're preparing ourselves now so that when our time comes, will be able to lead with both wisdom and compassion. And even most importantly, we're moving from awareness to now being in a position of accountability, holding ourselves as well as each other accountable. Again, it's not a case where we want to topple over institutions and displace those who came before us. But in fact, our hope lies in wanting to help to do our part to rebuild them with compassion and with creativity and with collective wisdom. And honestly, that gives me more than just hope. Like it gives me faith. And I'll end with this. Maya Angelou, she says a quote, nothing can dim the light that shines from within. And I honestly and wholeheartedly believe that as long as we as young people keep shining, there is more than hope. There is a future worth building.
Beautifully put. Yeah. Thank you. Thank each of you for taking part, for speaking with me and the CPA and our listeners. It's been really insightful and a lot of fun getting to know each of us a bit better. And yeah, it's been a very hopeful note to end on. So yeah, I'd like to thank you all again for being here today.
Listen to the CPA podcast via the CPA website, on the CPA YouTube channel, or find Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth on your favourite podcast platform.